My name is Reese. I'm the founder of Well Built Wealth, and we pretty much eat retirement plans for breakfast. We see people retiring with more than $1 million, and we see people retiring with less than $1 million. It's really quite doable either way. But today's video is all about what it looks like to retire with $1 million on the button. Today, we're going to take a look at this through the lens of a test couple named Joey and Zoe Gamoe. For the record, originally I made up that last name, but then I Googled it just to check and see if it was actually a real name, and indeed, it is. Now, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of it, but I like it when names rhyme, so anyway, as you guessed it, Joey and Zoe have $1 million squirreled away, and they want to retire ASAP. End of this year, in fact. And so they want to know what they can get away with. And so what we're going to do to start things off is we're going to set the table with the basics of their situation and our base assumptions so that you can get a really clear idea of what we're doing here. And then we're going to jump into our ridiculously awesome software and play around with a bunch of different options for them. But a quick note first, these assumptions that we're using are not the holy grail. We're not married to these. We just have to pick something reasonable to work with because obviously there's a gazillion different variations that we could use, but we don't want to be here all month long going through each one of them. And also to save time, what we want to do with this situation today is keep it realistic but simple so that we don't drown in minutia. But obviously, whenever we're doing plans for actual clients, we customize and we do whatever it is that makes sense for them. Anyway, here's the basic situation for Joey and Zoe. They're both 64 and retiring at the beginning of next year. They're both healthy, so their life expectancy is going to be set at age 90. Now, I understand that life expectancy in Canada is a little lower than age 90, but it's pretty standard in our industry to just pick 90 to be a bit conservative. But of course, if you're doing your own plan, you can pick and plan until whatever age you want to. We're going to peg long-term inflation at 3%. Now, we all know it's been substantially higher than that recently, but the powers that be tell us that their long-term goal is to have inflation down to 2.1%. But of course, they tell us all sorts of things, and so we've been using 3% lately just to be a little conservative. We're also going to assume that all of Joey and Zoe's investments will be held in a balanced portfolio. Now, we're going with balanced portfolios not because I think they're particularly awesome, but just because they happen to be particularly popular out there in the big wide world. And in the software we use, the current built-in rate of return for a balanced portfolio is 5.22%. So that's what we'll run with. Now, I just want to sidebar here for a quick second because I think it's important and it should be noted that we see a ton of situations. And it is obscenely common for us to see statements that show a long-term rate of return that is far less than this for balanced portfolios. It's pretty bad, actually. There are a lot of firms in this country that charge way too much and have long-term track records of totally subpar returns. A lot. And if you're in that kind of situation and you have given them plenty of time, but they still cannot hold their own, then just leave them. You do not have to stay where you are. It is really important to know that you do have options, so do not settle. Anyway, back to the assumptions. Joey and Zoe's portfolio is made up of the following. Zoe has an RRSP worth $350,000 and a TFSA worth $100,000. Now, Joey has always deeply admired Zoe, so he just copied her, and now he has the exact same amounts in the exact same accounts. And in addition to those, they have a joint non-registered account sitting at $100,000 for a grand total of $1 million. Joey and Zoe also own a home with no mortgage, and it is worth an additional $1 million. Now, you might already be thinking, well, you can't include that because now they're retiring with more than $1 million, and I get it. And so to begin, and for the bulk of this planning session, we're not going to include the value of the home. We'll just consider it a backup asset, okay? Because many people plan that way anyway. But also lots of people do have the idea of downsizing at some point in the future. So we are also just going to take a peek a little later on at what it might look like if they did downsize, just for the fun of it. Now on to pensions. Let's assume that neither of them have any work pensions, but they do have Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Security. Now, since Old Age Security is based purely off of how long you've lived in Canada, and both Joey and Zoe have lived here forever, then both of them are eligible for 100% of the possible benefit when they turn 65. CPP, on the other hand, is based on contributions that you made over your working career. Now, some people end up with the maximum amount that you could get out of CPP, but most people end up with less than the maximum for a variety of different reasons. So in this case study, we're going to give each of them 70% of the maximum possible amount. Oh, and we'll start off with each of them taking both CPP and OAS at the normal start time of age 65. Okay, last but not least, monthly income. Joey and Zoe are expecting that as they age, they're probably going to spend less and less. And so they're cool with building that idea into their plan. In the go-go phase, from age 65 to 75, they want to be able to spend $8,000 each month. And yes, we're talking after tax, money in the jeans, $8,000. In their slow-go phase, from age 75 to 85, they think they could get away with $6,500 a month and that would easily do the trick and still give them some wiggle room, so we go with that. And they're okay with dropping it a bit more for their no-go phase from age 85 to 90, but they also know that they may need additional care during this period, so they don't want to go too low. So they settle on dropping it by another $500 to $6,000 a month. And that pretty much sums it up. So let's jump in and see what they can get away with. Well, that's not too far off. As is, they are 94% on track of having enough investment and pension income to make it all happen. But before we start playing around too much here, I just want to stop and quickly explain what it is that you're looking at here so that it all makes clear sense to you. This percentage wheel simply indicates how on track someone is for being able to meet their retirement income goals. And it's using all the resources they have available to give them income, such as their investments and their pensions. But it doesn't include the value of their house because they can't spend that value. They can't access it for income unless they were to sell it later or downsize it. Anyway, if it's below 100%, well, we got some work to do. If it's above 100%, then we've got some buffer. And these bars down here represent each year of life to come and how much income is wanted in each of those years. You'll notice how these bars are getting taller as they go along, and that's because we have factored in inflation. Each year the income need is growing by 3% to keep up with the relentless inflation. You'll also notice that these bars drop in a couple of spots. And that's because this is where the spending decreases for the slow go and the no-go phases that we built in. And each color in the bars is showing us where the income is coming from. Right now, you can see that in year 1, Joey and Zoe still have employment income. And that makes sense because they haven't quite retired yet. In year 2, you can see that there is now income coming in from CPP, OAS, and their TFSAs. The other colors that you see here in future years represent income from their non-registered and RRSP/RIF accounts. And lastly, this little circle here is giving us a running tab of what the expected estate value will be in the end when they pass away. So it's great for that, but it's also a really quick and easy way to see the impact of different decisions as we make them in the software, because each decision will either add to or take away from the value of their net worth at death. But back to Joey and Zoe. They don't like being shy of their goal, but they also really don't want to reduce their retirement spending goal if they don't have to. So we jump into planning. First of all, I don't like the idea of drawing down all of their TFSAs early on in retirement. Sure, it would make for some really low tax years early on since they wouldn't pay any tax on withdrawals from their TFSAs. But it also eliminates the flexibility of having all of that tax-free money later on when it may be needed. Plus, it just pushes off the taxable forms of income and usually just compounds the tax problem for later. So our first alteration is going to be to turn their RRSPs into RIFs right away so that they can start drawing out of their taxable RIF accounts earlier rather than later. This tends to smooth out the tax rates throughout retirement and lower the overall tax bill. Okay, so doing that bumped us up 1% from 94 to 95%. It's not a game changer, but we're headed in the right direction. Next, we discuss the idea of delaying their CPP and their OAS from age 65 to age 70, because you can get an extra 42% out of CPP and an extra 36% out of OAS if you choose to do this. Now, if you aren't familiar with how all that works and the pros and cons of CPP and OAS timing, I have a very easy to understand video that tells you all you need to know. I'll leave a link below to it, but I won't bog you down here with the details. Anyway, Joey and Zoe talk it over, and since there's quite a bit more bang for buck in delaying CPP, they choose to delay that one, but not OAS. So we go with that. And now we're up another 3%. And you can see in the bar graph that CPP is now starting in 2030 and has grown to become quite a sizable chunk of their overall income at that point. In fact, at this stage, CPP and OAS are making up around half of their combined income, which is kind of nice since both of these are guaranteed as much as anything can be, and they're both indexed to grow with inflation. This adds some serious stability to their situation later in life, since investment portfolios can be volatile and are usually not guaranteed or indexed. Now, they might be more profitable, but the guarantees are nice to have too. Next, I want to tweak which accounts we are drawing from and when we're drawing from them, just to tighten things up a bit. You'll notice that now we're pushing TFSAs off until later, and we're focusing on drawing down the RIFs and non-registered accounts first. And as you can see, this adds another 1% to the solve rate. Then just one final tweak to optimize. This does little for the solve rate during retirement, but it does add a little extra juice to the estate value. And now we're very close, very. But then Joey, because he's a sharp cat, comes up with an idea. And he says, hey, since we're not going to be touching our TFSAs for a really long time now, why don't we try to get a bit more growth out of them? So we do it. We beef them up. And we change them from a balanced portfolio growing at 5.22% to a growth portfolio growing at 5.62%, which is a pretty conservative estimate of the rate of return for a growth portfolio, but we're sticking with the built-in rates of return that the software uses, which are a bit more on the conservative side, just to be safe. And there you have it. We hit the magic number, 100%. Their situation is solved. Or is it? We have no buffer here. They have very little wiggle room if things don't go as planned. In fact, let's take a look. Let's punch their plan in the face a few times and see how it holds up under a beating. I'm going to stress test this plan by giving them a 40% market crash the year after they retire, which is basically the worst possible timing. I'll also reduce all the expected returns by 1%. So now they're making under 5% tops. I'll also jack up the expected inflation by 1%, so it's not 3% anymore, but 4%. And we'll give them one final left hook by having each one of them live an extra 5 years to age 95, which simply means they'll have more years to pay for. And there you go. Brutal. Drop them down to 62% on track. And now they run out of their investments in 2037, which would leave them entirely dependent on OAS and CPP for the rest of their lives. Not awesome. Now, of course, in their situation, they do have a house that they could tap into if they had to. But remember, Joey and Zoe don't want to unless they have to, though this would likely be a situation where they would have to. But to be fair, I did just throw a total tsunami at them. And it's not likely that something this drastic would happen for their entire retirement without any reprieve, without any good news along the way. But it does highlight the need to build in some buffer. Joey and Zoe agree, so it's back to the planning. So what does it look like if we delay both of their retirements by a year? Well, it looks pretty good. It adds 6%. Not too shabby. However, Zoe is looking at me with palpable disgust. And in that moment, I realize that retiring a year later ain't gonna happen for Zoe. But Joey, on the other hand, quickly throws in that he actually has the opportunity or the option to work part-time after he retires if he wants to. And he can do that with the same firm that he's currently with. And actually, he kind of had that in the back of his mind anyway. He was thinking maybe he could do that for a few years and pull in around 30 grand a year. So we build that in. And look at that, right back to 106%. Well, what about Zoe? What if she did the exact same thing? Takes them to 112%. Now that's some decent buffer. But again, Zoe ain't having it, so we kill it. But they do like that nice, big, delicious buffer, and so I suggest the idea of shaving their retirement income goal just by a smidge. What if we drop their income goal by 5%? That would take their go-go income from $8,000 a month to $7,600 a month. And it would bump them up to 115% on track, which is a lovely amount of buffer. They feel like they could handle that, so they agree. Now, as I noted earlier, they would rather keep their house as a backup asset and not count on it at all. But they are also kind of curious to see what it would look like if they downsized their $1 million home to a $600,000 home in their mid-70s and therefore had an extra $400,000 to insert into their plan. No problem. Let's check it out. First of all, we can get rid of this reduce income strategy since they'll now have way more than enough cash from the proceeds of the downsize. Then we'll build in the downsize for age 75 like they wanted. And as expected, since they now have a bunch of extra cash from downsizing, they now have more money available to fund their retirement income goal, which is why it ballooned to 132% on track. Now that is a beautiful amount of buffer, but what they really wanted to know was how much more they could safely spend if they were going to do something like that. So let's beef up their income. The software automatically chose to increase it to 116% of their current amount, but that drops their solve rate down further than they like. So we tinker. And it looks like increasing their retirement income by 10% would give them lots of extra money to spend and still keep their buffer in a happy place. Okay, now as you can see, there's a lot of different variables that we can play with, and everyone has a different situation and different preferences. But with a $1 million portfolio, Joey and Zoe found their sweet spot for their go-go phase at just shy of $8,000 a month. Now, if they didn't have a home as a backup asset, then I'd probably recommend that they build in a bigger buffer just to be safe, but they do, so this plan works for them. Now, some of you might be thinking, but we're not Joey and Zoe. We're Jenny and Benny, or Brucey and Lucy. We have $1 million too, but we don't need to spend as much as they do. We can make it work on $6,000 a month. But we're 5 years younger than them. Could we pull that off? Well, let me just drop some of the strategies that we built, change a few of these inputs, and take a gander. Well, there you are. Super close. Well, let's just adjust your withdrawal strategy a bit. And yeah, that is definitely headed in the right direction. As you can see, we could just do this all day long. And in fact, that is exactly what we do here.